The distress beacon died with a whisper that echoed across 3 star systems. Commander Vexthara of the hegemony cruiser Bloodthorn watched the signal fade from her tactical display with predatory satisfaction. Somewhere in the debris field of what had once been a human research station, the last survivor had finally succumbed to the void. The hunt was over, skin complete, Commander, reported her sensor operator, mandibles clicking with excitement. One escape pod launched during our initial bombardment. Life signs, negative. Vexthara S for arms moved in a gesture of ritual completion. The hegemony had rules about such things: no witnesses, no survivors, no evidence. The humans' pathetic attempt at establishing a listening post in hegemony space had been crushed, as was proper. Their kind needed to understand that the galaxy belonged to superior species. What was the pod's trajectory, she asked, though it hardly mattered now. It drifted into the asteroid field. Commander, hull breach detected approximately 6 hours ago. Whatever was inside is dead. The bridge crew chittered their approval. These new humans were proving disappointingly fragile compared to the legends. When the hegemony had first encountered their species 5 cycles ago, there had been wild tales of their ferocity, their refusal to yield even when facing extinction. But in every engagement since, they had broken quickly, fled when pressed, died when cornered. Signal the fleet, Vexthara commanded. The sector is clean. We proceed to the next human outpost. But as the Bloodthorn and her escort vessels jumped to hyperspace, none of them detected the faint thermal signature deep within the asteroid field. None of them saw the battered escape pod wedged between two massive rocks, its occupant very much alive, very much conscious, and very much recording everything through a jury-rigged transmitter. Dr. Kane Holloway pressed his burned hands against the pod's makeshift communications array. Watching the hegemony ships disappear into the starstreak void, his research station was gone. His team of 37 colleagues, some of whom had become family over the past 3 years, were dead. The bastards had taken their time with the bombardment, savoring each explosion, each scream that had carried over the comm channels before going silent. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed he was dead. Kane's fingers moved across the transmitter's crude interface, encoding the battle recordings, the tactical data, the faces of his friends' killers. The signal would take weeks to reach the nearest human outpost, months to reach the colonies, nearly a year to reach Earth itself. But it would get there, because humans had learned, over their long and bloody history, that vengeance was a dish that improved with age. The pod's life support systems wheezed and groaned around him. King calculated he had perhaps 48 hours of air remaining, not enough to be rescued, but more than enough to ensure his message reached its destination. He thought of his daughter on New Geneva, of his ex-wife on Mars, of the billions of humans who would soon learn what had happened here. Recorded final message. He whispered into the transmitter, "This is Dr. Kane Holloway, exobiology research. Station Prometheus. We have been attacked by an alien force identifying themselves as the hegemony. They showed no mercy. They took no prisoners. They wanted us to know we were dying." He paused, watching a piece of debris from his former home drift past the pod's tiny viewport. "Tell them," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "that humanity remembers. Tell them we're coming." The transmission burst outward at light speed, carrying with it the genome of human rage that had toppled empires and raised civilizations. It carried the promise that had echoed through human history: "Do unto others as they have done unto you." In the cold vacuum of space, Kane Holloway died with a smile on his lips, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, humanity was already sharpening its knives. The hegemony had hunted one human and found him. Now they would discover what it meant to be hunted by all of them. The message reached Admiral Torino Varek aboard the UES Retribution 18 months later, transmitted through a chain of quantum relays that spanned half the galaxy. He read it 3 times before calling his staff meeting, and by the time his senior officers assembled in the briefing room, the fury in his eyes had crystallized into something far more dangerous. "Purpose, ladies and gentlemen," Varek began, his scarred face illuminated by the holographic display, showing the Prometheus station's final moments. "We have a genocide to answer for." The assembled officers, veterans of the Centauri Wars, survivors of the Titan Rebellion, architects of humanity's expansion into the void, watched in grim silence as Dr. Holloway's final transmission played out. When it ended, the briefing room held the kind of quiet that preceded hurricanes. "Intelligence assessment. Commander Rivas, Varric ordered. Eleanor Rivas, head of the Terran Defense Force's Xenological Warfare Division, stood and activated her own display. The hegemony is a confederation of 12 species, Admiral, approximately 400 worlds under their control. With a military force we estimate at 3 million vessels of various classes. They've been expanding for the past 60 years, and they don't negotiate. Captain Marcus Corbin, the fleet's tactical coordinator, leaned forward. What's their standard operating procedure for first contact, extermination? Rivas replied, flatly. We've identified 17 species that simply disappeared after the hegemony reached their systems. No survivors, no refugees, no trace they ever existed. The silence deepened. Sir, spoke Captain Yuki Tanaka, commander of the carrier Nemesis. What are our orders? Admiral Varric stood and walked to the massive viewport that dominated the briefing room's forward wall. Beyond it, the assembled might of humanity's third fleet hung in the void. 63 vessels, from nimble corvettes to the massive dreadnought Apocalypse, bristling with weapons that could crack moons. Our orders, he said without turning around, are to remind the galaxy why humans have survived every attempt to destroy them. For the past 10,000 years, he turned back to face his officers. We're going to find this hegemony. We're going to hurt them, and we're going to keep hurting them until they beg us to explain what mercy means. The first engagement came 3 weeks later in the Kepler 440 system. Hegemony patrol vessels had been harrying human cargo ships, destroying them for sport and leaving the wreckage as warnings. When Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the system's outer planets, they found a hegemony squadron of 8 ships picking through the debris of the merchant vessel. Golden Dawn, battle stations, Admiral Varric ordered, his voice carrying across the fleet's communication network. Remember, we're not here for glory. We're here for justice. The hegemony squadron, composed of sleek, predatory vessels that looked like they'd been grown rather than built, immediately assumed an attack formation. Their leader, a heavy cruiser bristling with plasma cannons, broadcast a warning in broken human standard. Human fleet, you trespass in hegemony space. Withdraw or be destroyed. Varric's response was to target the cruiser with the Retribution's main guns. Fire. Human vessels, built for durability and overwhelming firepower, tore through the hegemony formation like wolves through sheep. The aliens' weapons were advanced, their shields impressive, but they had never faced an enemy that treated warfare as both art and religion. The Nemesis launched fighter squadrons that swarmed the enemy vessels, their pilots screaming ancient war cries as they dove into the enemy formation. The destroyer's fury and vengeance flanked the hegemony squadron, their railguns sending tungsten slugs through alien hulls at relativistic speeds. But it was the dreadnought Apocalypse that delivered the coup de grace. Her main battery, 6 massive particle beam projectors that drew power from her fusion reactors, lanced out and vaporized the hegemony flagship in a burst of superheated plasma. When the engagement ended, 8 hegemony vessels had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Human losses, 0. Sir, reported Communications Officer Park. We're receiving a transmission from the remaining hegemony survivors. They're asking for terms. Admiral Varric smiled, and every officer in the briefing room felt a chill run down their spine. Tell them, he said, that humans don't negotiate with genocidal maniacs. Tell them to run home to their masters and explain that the prey has decided to become the predator. As Third Fleet moved deeper into hegemony space, leaving behind only wreckage and a warning beacon broadcasting Dr. Holloway's final message, the first seeds of fear began to take root in an empire that had never known defeat. The news of the Kepler 440 massacre reached hegemony high command in the form of a terrified survivor's testimony. Sub-Commander Krexithani, his carapace still bearing scorch marks from the human attack, stood before the War Council trembling with more than just fear. He trembled with the knowledge that everything they believed about humans was wrong. They came out of hyperspace like demons, he reported, his translator struggling with the emotional undertones of his clicking speech. No warnings, no negotiations. They simply killed. All of Squadron Leader Vexcoral's ships were destroyed in minutes. Grand Admiral Zomvex, a towering hegemony overlord whose species had conquered 40 worlds before joining the Confederation, listened with growing unease. How many human vessels? 63. Grand Admiral, but they fought like 600. Their weapons, we've never seen anything like them. They turned the flagship into plasma with a single volley. The War Council, composed of the military leaders from all 12 hegemony species, began chattering among themselves in their various languages. Fear, something they had not experienced in decades, crept into their voices. Silence, Zomvex commanded. One engagement does not make them invincible. We will mobilize the 3rd Defense Fleet. 500 ships will teach these humans their place. But even as he spoke, reports were flooding in from across the border sectors. Human fleets, not just 3rd Fleet, but others, emerging from hyperspace, like avenging angels, had begun systematic attacks on hegemony installations. They hit supply convoys, destroyed research stations, and eliminated patrol squadrons with ruthless efficiency. The humans weren't just fighting. They were sending a message. Admiral Varric received the intelligence reports aboard the Retribution as his fleet prepared to assault the hegemony fortress world of Korvax Prime. The enemy was mobilizing their response. 500 vessels converging on their position, sir, Captain Tanaka reported from the tactical station. Long-range sensors are picking up massive hegemony fleet movements. They're throwing everything at us. Good, Varric replied, studying the star charts. Let them come. Captain Corbin, what's the status of our reinforcements? 7th Fleet will arrive in 18 hours, Admiral. That gives us another 40 ships. 12th Fleet is 3 days out, another 30 vessels. The mathematics were still against them. Even with reinforcements, humanity would be facing a 5-to-1 disadvantage. But Varric had studied the after-action reports from every engagement over the past month, and he'd noticed something the hegemony hadn't. Their enemies were predictable. They fight like they hunt, he told his staff during the pre-battle briefing. In packs, using overwhelming numbers to crush weaker prey. They've never faced an enemy that thinks like we do. And how do we think, sir? Asked Commander Rivas. Varric's smile was arctic, like apex predators who've learned that sometimes the best defense is total annihilation of the threat. The Battle of Korvax Prime began when the hegemony 3rd Defense Fleet dropped out of hyperspace, in perfect formation, a vast crescent designed to envelope and destroy the human forces. 500 ships, from nimble interceptors to massive battle cruisers, advanced with the confidence of a force that had never known defeat. They lasted longer than the patrol squadron at Kepler 440 to almost 15 minutes. Admiral Varric had positioned his combined fleet's 3rd, 7th, and the advanced elements of 12th in what appeared to be a defensive sphere around Korvax Prime. When the hegemony fleet began their encirclement maneuver, the humans did something unexpected. They scattered. What had appeared to be a defensive formation suddenly revealed itself as a 3-dimensional maze of overlapping fire zones. Human ships, working in perfect coordination, began systematically dismantling the hegemony formation from within. The carrier Nemesis and her sister ship Ragnarok launched over 400 fighters, their pilots diving into the enemy formation with suicidal courage. But these weren't suicide runs, they were precision strikes, targeting the hegemony vessel's shield generators and weapon systems, leaving them vulnerable to the devastating follow-up attacks from the human capital ships. The Dreadnought's Apocalypse and Armageddon moved through the battle like ancient gods of war, their main batteries reaching out to touch enemy vessels with beams of concentrated destruction. Hegemony battlecruisers, massive ships that had conquered entire star systems, simply vaporized under the human assault. But the aliens weren't defenseless. Their plasma weaponry carved through human shields, and several destroyers fell to concentrated fire. The cruiser Defiance took a direct hit from a hegemony heavy cannon and broke apart. Her crew of 800 dying in seconds. It was Captain Marcus Corbin who turned the tide. Commanding the heavy cruiser Vindication, he led a formation of 12 ships directly into the heart of the hegemony fleet, targeting their command vessel, a massive battleship that served as the fleet's coordination center. All ships, concentrate fire on the flagship, he ordered, even as alien weapons tore chunks from his vessel's hull. Take out their command structure. The combined firepower of 13 human warships focused on a single target, the hegemony flagship, protected by shields that could withstand planetary bombardment, held for almost 30 seconds before the barriers collapsed and human weapons found their mark. The explosion could be seen from orbit around Korvax Prime. With their command ship destroyed and their formation shattered, the hegemony fleet began to break apart. Some vessels tried to retreat, only to find human ships waiting in their escape routes. Others fought to the end, dying with the same courage their victims had shown when the battle ended. 437 hegemony vessels had been destroyed. Human losses, 23 ships with over 6,000 dead. It was the largest naval engagement. As Admiral Varric surveyed the debris field that had once been the hegemony's most powerful fleet, a communication arrived from Earth. The content was simple, but it carried the weight of an entire civilization's rage. Admiral Varric, you are hereby authorized to pursue the enemy to their home systems. Show them what humans do to those who commit genocide. Make them remember Dr. Kane Holloway. The hunt was about to become an extermination. The fall of Corvax Prime sent shockwaves through the hegemony that reached their capital world of Zethkar within hours. For the first time in their civilization's history, they faced an enemy that not only refused to submit, but seemed capable of destroying them entirely. Grand Admiral Zomvex stood in the ruins of his strategy chamber, holographic displays showing the catastrophic losses at Corvax Prime flickering around him like dying stars. The 3rd Defense Fleet 500 ships, the pride of the hegemony military, had been annihilated. Worse, the humans had broadcast the entire battle across subspace frequencies, ensuring every species in the galaxy would witness the hegemony's humiliation. How many survivors? He asked his intelligence coordinator. Though he dreaded the answer, 63 ships escaped the battle. Grand Admiral, most heavily damaged, the humans. They let them flee deliberately. Why would they? Zomvex stopped, understanding flooding through him like ice water. They want us to spread fear. Yes, sir, and it's working. We're receiving reports of uprisings on 12 worlds. Subject species that have been pacified for decades are suddenly questioning our authority. The Grand Admirals for arms moved in a gesture of fury. Mobilize everything, every ship, every weapon, every ally. These humans will learn what it means to threaten the hegemony. But even as he spoke, Zomvex knew they were no longer fighting just the humans. They were fighting the idea of the humans, the terrifying concept that the galaxy's apex predators could themselves be prey. Admiral Varric received the intelligence briefings aboard the Retribution as his expanded fleet, now numbering over 100 vessels from 6 different battle groups, moved toward the hegemony's inner systems. The reports painted a picture of an empire beginning to fracture under pressure. Sir, Commander Rivas reported, we're detecting massive fleet movements throughout hegemony space. They're pulling ships from garrison duties, abandoning defensive positions. It looks like they're massing everything for a final confrontation. Good, Varric replied, studying the tactical displays. How many ships are we looking at? Conservative estimate, 2,000 vessels, Admiral. They're stripping every system, calling in every ally, even pressing civilian craft into service. The numbers should have been daunting. 2,000 ships against 200 represented odds that no rational military commander would accept. But Admiral Varric had learned something about his enemy over the past month of constant warfare. They thought in terms of overwhelming force, not tactical brilliance. Captain Corbin, he ordered, I want you to take a squadron to the hegemony, mining world of Kelthan. Don't engage their defenses directly. I want you to destroy their orbital processing stations. Sir, that's civilian infrastructure. That's the industrial capacity they're using to build weapons. Varric interrupted. They want to play by extinction rules? We'll teach them what extinction looks like. The attack on Kelthan came without warning. Captain Corbin's squadron of 8 ships emerged from hyperspace and immediately began systematic destruction of the mining platforms that process rare metals. For hegemony weapons manufacturing, the orbital stations, designed for commerce rather than combat, offered no resistance. But Corbin's real target wasn't the infrastructure, it was a message. Attention hegemony forces. He broadcast on all frequencies as his ships reduced another processing platform to glowing debris. This is Captain Marcus Corbin of the Terran Defense Force. You murdered 37 humans at Research Station Prometheus. In response, we're going to dismantle your entire civilization, piece by piece, until you understand what you've done. The psychological warfare was deliberate and devastating. Across hegemony space, subject species began to whisper that perhaps their overlords weren't invincible after all. On 17 worlds, rebellions erupted as populations that had been suppressed for generations suddenly found the courage to resist. But it was the Battle of the Hadron Nebula that truly demonstrated humanity's tactical evolution. Grand Admiral Zomvex had gathered nearly 1,800 ships in the nebula's electromagnetic storms, using the interference to mask his fleet's movements. It was a brilliant strategy. The humans would be forced to enter the nebula blind, where hegemony ships could emerge from the sensor-blocking gas clouds and destroy them at close range. Admiral Varric led his fleet into the nebula knowing it was a trap. He entered anyway, all ships. He broadcast as the human fleet penetrated the swirling clouds of ionized gas. Remember that we're not just fighting for revenge anymore. We're fighting to ensure that what happened at Prometheus never happens to anyone, anywhere, ever again. The hegemony attack came from all directions simultaneously. Ships materialized out of the nebula's electromagnetic interference like ghosts. Plasma cannons firing even as they broke sensor lock. It was a perfectly executed ambush that should have annihilated the human fleet. Instead, it became a slaughter. The humans had spent the past month studying hegemony tactics, and they prepared accordingly. Every ship in the fleet carried enhanced, short-range sensors designed specifically for nebula warfare. More importantly, they developed new weapons, gravity bombs that could clear entire cubic kilometers of gas, revealing hidden enemy ships, and quantum torpedoes that could track targets through electromagnetic interference. The Battle of Hadron Nebula became a three-dimensional nightmare of ships, appearing and disappearing in the swirling clouds, weapons, fire lancing through the darkness like lightning. But where the hegemony had expected to find confused, blinded prey, they found predators who had learned to hunt in their own preferred environment. Human fighter squadrons, led by Commander Jessica, Vale aboard her modified interceptor Wraith, swept through the nebula like sharks scenting blood. They struck at hegemony formations from impossible angles, their pilots using the electromagnetic interference as cover, while their enhanced sensors gave them targeted solutions their enemies couldn't. T-Match, the dreadnought Apocalypse, commanded by Captain Sarah Kim, anchored the human battle line and systematically eliminated hegemony capital ships. With her upgraded main batteries, each shot was precisely calculated, turning enemy vessels into brief stars in the nebula's perpetual twilight. When the 8-hour battle finally ended, over 1,400 hegemony ships had been destroyed. Human losses, 31 vessels. But the true victory wasn't measured in ships destroyed, it was measured in hope shattered. The hegemony's most powerful fleet, assembled from across their entire empire, had been obliterated by a force 1/10 its size. As Admiral Varric's fleet emerged from the nebula's far side, heading directly for the hegemony capital, a transmission reached him from Earth. The message was brief. Admiral, you have done more than avenge Dr. Holloway. You have reminded the galaxy that humanity's greatest weapon has always been our refusal to accept defeat. Finish them. The final act was about to begin. The capital world of Zethkar had never known war. For 300 years, it had been the untouchable heart of the hegemony, a world where the ruling classes lived in perfect security while their fleets conquered and enslaved across the galaxy. Now, as Admiral Varric's fleet approached the system's outer planets, that security crumbled like a house built on sand. Grand Admiral Zomvex stood in the Planetary Defense Command Center, watching the tactical displays with growing desperation. The humans had arrived with over 300 ships. Reinforcements from across human space had swelled their numbers, and they showed no signs of slowing their advance toward the capital. Status report, he demanded. His tactical coordinator, a nervous hegemony officer whose species resembled oversized manises, chittered frantically. We have 400 ships in defensive positions around Zethkar, Grand Admiral. The orbital defense platforms are fully operational, and the planetary shield generators. The Krexithani have committed 50 ships. The Velteron Dominion sent 30. The others. The officer's mandibles clicked in distress. The others are not responding to our calls for aid. Zomvex felt the cold touch of inevitability. The hegemony's empire had been built on fear, and now that fear was turning against them. Their subject species sensed weakness and were abandoning the alliance like rats. Fleeing a sinking ship, then we fight with what we have, he declared. Signal all ships we make our stand here. Admiral Varric stood on the bridge of the Retribution, studying the massive defensive array that protected Zethkar. 400 enemy ships arranged in concentric spheres around the planet, supported by orbital weapons platforms that bristled with enough firepower to sterilize continents. It was the strongest defensive position he'd ever faced. Impressive, he murmured to Captain Corbin. They've learned from their defeats. Sir, reported Commander Rivas from the intelligence station. We're detecting massive civilian evacuations from the planet's surface. Millions of refugees fleeing to the outer systems. Varric nodded. good. We're not here to slaughter innocents." He turned to address his fleet commanders via holographic link. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we came for. The heart of an empire that believes genocide is acceptable policy. Today, we cut that heart out." The assault began with a probe by human fighter squadrons, testing the strength of the hegemony's defensive positions. Commander Vale, now leading over 800 fighters from multiple carriers, swept toward the outer defensive sphere like a swarm of angry wasps. The hegemony response was immediate and overwhelming. Plasma cannons from the defensive platforms reached out with deadly precision, vaporizing dozens of human fighters in the opening seconds. But for every fighter destroyed, two more broke through, their pilots pushing their craft to the very limits of their performance envelopes. "This is Vale to all squadrons." The fighter commander's voice crackled across the comm channels. "Pattern Delta 7, hit their point defense systems and clear a path for the capital ships." The fighters dove into the hegemony formation like bullets fired from the guns of gods. Human pilots, trained from childhood in the warrior traditions of their species, fought with a combination of technological superiority and raw courage that the aliens had never encountered. Lieutenant Commander Alex Vasquez, piloting his fighter Retribution's Edge, led his squadron directly into the teeth of a hegemony heavy cruiser's defense grid. Plasma bolts seared past his cockpit as he lined up his attack run, but his voice remained steady on the comm. "Remember, Prometheus, boys and girls, these bastards asked for this." His quantum torpedoes punched through the cruiser's shields and detonated deep within its hull. The explosion tore the alien vessel apart from within, adding its debris to the growing constellation of wreckage around Zethkar. But the hegemony weren't breaking this time. Their ships, fighting with the desperation of creatures who knew they faced extinction, struck back with unprecedented fury. The human carrier Nemesis took a direct hit from a hegemony battle station's main gun and split in half, her crew of 3,000 dying in seconds. Admiral Varric watched his flagship sister ship die and felt something cold settle in his chest. Not grief that would come later. This was pure, refined hatred. "All ships," he ordered, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network, "close to engagement range. I want those platforms destroyed." The dreadnoughts Apocalypse and Armageddon led the charge, their massive hulls absorbing punishment that would have vaporized smaller vessels. Behind them came the battle cruisers, their crews singing ancient war songs as they closed with the enemy. Captain Sarah Kim, commanding the Apocalypse, faced the largest of the orbital defense platforms, a station the size of a small moon, wrestling with enough weapons to level a planet's surface. Her ship's main batteries reached out with beams of concentrated annihilation, striking the station shields with the force of solar flares. "Target their reactor cores," she ordered her weapons officer. "I want that thing turned into a new star." The exchange of fire between the dreadnought and the defense platform lasted 17 minutes. Both vessels poured everything they had into their enemy, creating a light show visible from the planet's surface. When the platform's shields finally collapsed, Kim's final salvo penetrated to its fusion reactors. The explosion lit up Zethkar night sky and sent shock waves through the planet's atmosphere. But victory came at a cost. The Apocalypse had taken critical damage, her hull breached in 17 places, nearly half her crew dead or wounded. As Kim surveyed the damage reports, she realized her ship was dying. "Admiral," she reported to Varric, "we're losing structural integrity. Estimate 15 minutes before critical failure." Varric's response was immediate. "Abandon ship, Captain. You've done enough." "Negative, sir. We've still got main battery power. Request permission to ram the Planetary Defense Command Station." The silence on the comm channel lasted only seconds before Varric's voice returned, heavy with pride and sorrow. "Permission granted, Captain. It's been an honor." The Apocalypse turned toward the command station, her engines pushing her forward on what everyone knew would be her final voyage. As the massive dreadnought accelerated toward her target, Captain Kim opened a channel to her remaining crew. "This is the captain speaking. We've been given the honor of delivering the killing blow to the heart of this murderous empire. Remember that we die not for conquest, but for justice. Remember Dr. Holloway. Remember why we came here." The Apocalypse struck the command station at nearly 20% of light speed. The collision released energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon, vaporizing both vessels instantly and sending debris raining down on Zethkar's surface. In the sudden silence that followed, the remaining hegemony ships found themselves without central command. their defensive formation beginning to collapse. Admiral Varric seized the moment. All ships, general assault. Show them what happens when you hunt humans. The final phase of the battle became a massacre. Human ships, their crews energized by the sacrifice of the apocalypse, swept through the disorganized hegemony formation. Like avenging angels, the mathematical advantage the aliens had enjoyed meant nothing when their command structure had been decapitated. When the guns finally fell silent, over 300 hegemony vessels had been destroyed. Human losses, 4 to 7 ships, include some of the finest vessels in the fleet. But Zethkar was theirs, and with it, the heart of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 decades. The surrender came at dawn, broadcast from the ruins of the hegemony's capital complex as the first rays of Zethkar's sun illuminated the smoking wreckage that had once been the seat of galactic power. Grand Admiral Zomvex, his ceremonial armor cracked and bloodied, stood among the debris of his civilization and spoke words that no hegemony leader had ever imagined saying. To the human fleet commander, his voice carried across all frequencies, translated into dozens of languages for the galaxy to hear. We yield. The hegemony formally surrenders. We ask for terms. Admiral Varric received the transmission aboard the battle-damaged Retribution, his flagship scarred by plasma burns and hull breaches that would take months to fully repair. Around him, his surviving officers, veterans of the bloodiest naval campaign in human history, waited for his response. Terms, Varric repeated, his voice carrying across the bridge. They want terms. He walked to the massive viewport that dominated the forward section of his command deck, looking down at the world that had been the source of so much death and suffering. Smoke rose from a dozen impact sites where debris from the battle had fallen through the atmosphere. The orbital defense grid that had once made Zethkar invulnerable was now nothing but expanding clouds of metal and plasma. Sir, Commander Rivas approached cautiously. We're receiving communications from across hegemony space. Their subject species are declaring independence. The Empire is collapsing. Varric nodded slowly. And their fleet, scattered. Most of their remaining ships are fleeing to the outer systems. Intelligence estimates they have fewer than 200 vessels left in fighting condition. The numbers told the story. In less than 6 months, humanity had taken an empire of 400 worlds and 3 million ships and reduced it to a handful of refugees fleeing into the void. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Admiral Varric felt the weight of every life lost in the campaign, the crew of the apocalypse, the pilots who had died in the fighter swarms, the thousands of sailors who had given their lives to reach this moment. Grand Admiral Zomvex appeared on the main display, his alien features marked by exhaustion and defeat. Behind him, other hegemony leaders, representatives of the dozen species that had formed their alliance, waited for judgment. You asked for terms, Varric began, his voice cold as the void between stars. Here are my terms. Every species enslaved by the hegemony will be granted immediate independence. Every world conquered by your forces will be liberated. Your military will be disbanded. Your weapons destroyed. And our people? Zomvex asked. Varric was quiet for a long moment, considering. He thought of Dr. Kane Holloway, dying alone in his escape pod, recording his final message with hands burned by the weapons that had killed his friends. He thought of Research Station Prometheus, destroyed for no reason other than the hegemony's belief that might made right. Your people will be relocated to designated worlds under human supervision. He said finally, you will be monitored, contained, prevented from ever again threatening innocent species. But you will live. The alien leaders exchanged glances, clearly surprised. They had expected extermination, the same fate they had delivered to 17 other species. You show mercy we did not expect, Zomvex said quietly. We show justice, Varric corrected. There's a difference, but understand this: if any hegemony ship, any hegemony weapon, any hegemony agent ever again threatens a human life or the life of any innocent being, we will return, and next time, there will be no surrender, no terms, no mercy. We will simply erase you from existence. The transmission ended, leaving Varric alone with his thoughts and the magnitude of what they had accomplished. The hegemony, the most powerful empire in known space, had been broken by a civilization they had dismissed as primitive prey. Sir, Captain Tanaka's voice interrupted his reverie. We're receiving priority communications from Earth. The Security Council wants a full briefing. Varric nodded. Tell them we'll depart for Sol System once our repairs are complete. And Tanaka, send a message to every human colony, every outpost, every ship in the fleet. Tell them that Dr. Kane Holloway has been avenged. But even as the words left his mouth, Varric knew the real victory wasn't in the conquest of Zethkar or the collapse of the hegemony. It was in the message they had sent to the galaxy. Humanity would not be hunted, would not be exterminated, would not go quietly into the dark. 3 weeks later, as human fleets began the massive undertaking of liberating hundreds of worlds and millions of enslaved beings, a new reality began to emerge across the galaxy. Species that had lived in terror for generations suddenly found themselves free. Trade routes that had been controlled by hegemony overlords opened to independent commerce. The balance of power that had dominated galactic politics for 3 centuries shifted overnight on Earth in the halls of the Terran Defense Force headquarters. A new doctrine was being written, the Holloway Doctrine, named for the man whose death had triggered the war, established humanity's role as protectors of the innocent and enemies of tyrants. Any species that practiced genocide, any empire that enslaved others, any force that threatened the weak, would find themselves facing the combined might of human civilization. Admiral Varric stood in his office, looking out at the orbital shipyards where new vessels were already under construction. The war had cost humanity dearly, over 50,000 dead, hundreds of ships destroyed, resources that would take years to replace. But it had also proven something that would reshape the galaxy's future. Humans, when pushed to their limit, didn't break. They became something far more dangerous. 5 years after the fall of Zethkar, the galaxy had learned to live with a new reality. Humanity was no longer the newcomer species, struggling to find its place among the stars. They had become the arbiters of galactic justice, the force that others called upon when tyrants needed to be stopped and innocents needed protection. Admiral Torino Varric, now promoted to Fleet Admiral and commander of the Terran Defense Forces Rapid Response Division, stood in the memorial chamber aboard the newly constructed flagship Kane Holloway. The walls were lined with the names of every human who had died in what historians were already calling the Retribution War. But at the center of the memorial stood a simple plaque bearing the words of Dr. Holloway's final transmission. They wanted us to know we were dying. Tell them that humanity remembers. Tell them we're coming, sir. Commander Eleanor Rivas, now his chief of staff, approached with a data pad. The liberation fleets are reporting in. The last of the hegemony's forced labor camps have been shut down. Over 40 million beings have been freed and returned to their homeworlds. Varric nodded, though his expression remained somber, and the hegemony survivors relocated to the Kepler 438 system as planned. Their population has stabilized at around 100 million across 3 worlds. They're adapting to agricultural life. No signs of military reconstruction. The decision to spare the hegemony species had been controversial. Many in the Terran government had argued for complete extermination, the same fate the aliens had planned for humanity, but Varric had insisted on a different path. The survivors would live, but they would live as farmers and craftsmen, forbidden from developing military technology, monitored by human observers. Their children raised to understand the horror their ancestors had perpetrated. Just as Varric had argued before the Earth Security Council, means being better than those who wronged us. We are not genocidal maniacs, we are protectors. Admiral Rivas continued, we're also receiving reports from the frontier sectors. 3 new species have requested membership in the Terran Defense Alliance. They're offering to contribute ships and personnel to our rapid response fleets. The alliance had been an unexpected development. As word of humanity's victory over the hegemony spread, dozens of species had approached Earth requesting protection agreements. Some offered trade partnerships, others military cooperation, but all shared the same basic desire. They wanted to be on humanity's side of another empire, decided to play a conquest. What's the status? Task Force Prometheus is dealing with the Velkari situation in the Rigel sector. Apparently, they've been raiding colony ships from the newly liberated worlds. Task Force Vengeance is investigating reports of slave trading in the Centauri cluster, and Task Force Retribution is responding to a distress call from the Vegan Republic. Something about a species called the Devourers trying to establish a hunting preserve, using sentient beings as prey. Varric smiled grimly. The names of the task forces had been chosen deliberately, each one carrying the memory of what had started this transformation of human military doctrine. Dr. Holloway's death had not just been avenged, it had become the catalyst for a new age of galactic politics. Sir, Rivas hesitated. There's something else. We've received a transmission from the Outer Rim. It's unusual. She activated the holographic display, and the image of an alien appeared, a species Varric didn't recognize, with features that seemed to shift between reptilian and insectoid. The being's voice, when it spoke, carried undertones of fear and respect. To the humans of the Terran Defense Force, the alien said, "I am Hive-Speaker Zekethal of the Consuming Swarm. We have heard of your victory over the hegemony. We have heard of your justice. We contact you now to inform you that the swarm is moving to new hunting grounds. Far from any human territories, we do not wish to misunderstand each other." The transmission ended, leaving the memorial chamber in silence. "A species we've never encountered is changing their migration patterns to avoid us," Rivas observed. "The psychological impact of our campaign is still spreading." Varric considered this. In the 5 years since Zethkar, they had fought 17 smaller conflicts, liberating enslaved species, stopping genocidal campaigns, and establishing the principle that certain behaviors would not be tolerated in civilized space. Each victory had added to humanity's reputation until their name had become synonymous with swift, terrible justice. "Any word from the exploration fleets?" he asked. "Captain Singh's expedition reached the galactic core last month. They report finding the ruins of an ancient civilization, something that called itself the Eternal Dominion. From the archaeological evidence, it looked like they were a species that believed in conquest through extermination. They disappeared about 50,000 years ago. Disappeared how? Unknown. But Captain Singh found something interesting in their final records, references to a young species from the spiral arm that refused to submit. A species that fought back with such ferocity that the Dominion abandoned their expansion plans and retreated to the core systems." Varric raised an eyebrow. "You think they encountered an earlier human civilization or our predecessors? The point is, sir, this pattern might be older than we realized. Maybe the galaxy has always needed someone willing to stand up to the bullies." As if summoned by their conversation, an alert chimed from the bridge. "Admiral, to the bridge," came the announcement. "Priority transmission from Earth Command." Varric made his way to the bridge of the Kane Holloway, a vessel that had been designed with the lessons learned from the Retribution War. She was faster than the old Retribution, more heavily armed than the Apocalypse, and carried enough firepower to level a moon. More importantly, she carried the hopes of 43 species that had joined the Terran Defense Alliance. "Report," he ordered as he took his position in the command chair. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving a distress call from the Andromeda contact mission. They've encountered a species called the Final Harvest apparently. They're strip mining inhabited worlds, processing the populations into raw materials for their expansion fleet." Varric felt the familiar cold anger settle in his chest. Even now, 5 years after they had thought they'd sent a clear message to the galaxy, there were still species that believed might made right. "How many ships are we looking at?" he asked. "Intelligence estimates approximately 800 vessels, sir. They're heading toward the local group of galaxies, apparently planning to harvest everything in their path. 800 ships. It was fewer than the hegemony had fielded, but in another galaxy, against human forces that would be operating far from their supply lines. It would be the greatest challenge the Terran Defense Force had ever faced." Varric stood and walked to the forward viewport, looking out at the fleet of vessels that surrounded his flagship. 200 ships, crewed by the finest sailors in human space, supported by allied vessels from a dozen different species. It should have been insufficient for the task ahead. But Admiral Varric had learned something important during the war against the hegemony. The size of the enemy force mattered less than the righteousness of the cause and the determination of those who fought for it. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We're going to Andromeda. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we're going to need reinforcements." It seems the lesson we taught the hegemony needs to be repeated for a new audience. As the Kane Holloway and her escort vessels prepared to jump to hyperspace, Varric returned to the memorial chamber one final time. He stood before Dr. Holloway's plaque and spoke quietly. "Doctor, your death started something that's bigger than any of us imagined. We've become what you knew we could be, protectors of the innocent, enemies of tyrants, the species that stands between the darkness and the light. I promise you that wherever evil raises its head, wherever the strong prey upon the weak, humanity will be there to stop it." He paused, thinking of the battles to come, the lives that would be lost, the civilizations that would be saved. They hunted one human and found a civilization that doesn't forgive, he said to the empty chamber. Now they're going to learn that we don't forget, either. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying with them the accumulated fury of a species that had learned its greatest strength was not in its weapons or its ships, but in its absolute refusal to allow evil to triumph. Behind them, across hundreds of worlds, billions of beings slept safely because humanity had decided that some things were worth fighting for, and some enemies were worth destroying completely. Dr. Kane Holloway's final transmission had reached its destination after all. It had found a civilization that remembered its debts, honored its dead, and protected its friends. It had found humanity at its best.